Welcome to It Takes a Village, Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. I'm Dr. Ann Bergen. The purpose of this series of programs is really to recognize the challenge of raising young people to lives of meaning and purpose, to thrive out there in today's world, and especially to support parents as it's their main function. How we as a community can come together to share resources, ideas, strategies, basically wisdom. We now know that one stage in young people's lives is that transition to college and sort of thriving in those first few weeks when they're there, the first few months when they're there. We're seeing a lot of troubling issues surface as evidenced by increased levels of anxiety and depression, eating disorders. And we're finding that a significant number actually are dropping out. And certainly there's a financial cost to that, but also the emotional devastation that comes with that. So to that end, we are going to be doing a series of programs on this college transition process. And I'm going to welcome my guest today, Mark Altman, who has actually been on the show before, but he really does recognize the importance of providing support to young people and to their parents and helping them sort of navigate these waters. So would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit and telling us about what you're doing in this area just in general and how you came to want to devote your life to this? And can you speak a little bit about that before I start to home in on questions?
Sure. It's good to be back, Ann.
Yes.
Nice to see you. I think, my background is I'm a single father. I've raised 3 kids, and I really love kids. I really love coaching and teaching. I love family. And a couple of years ago, it was starting to bother me that there weren't really a lot of resources or programs to help kids and families communicate better, more confidently, more effectively. And so January of 2016, I decided to, as part of my company, I started to write curriculum, create programs for kids and families to achieve those goals. And when it comes to coping skills and communication skills and dealing with the many challenges and obstacles that kids face today, I think one of the biggest areas is we need to proactively get kids talking and not reactively have them dealing with problems after they already happen. And so that's what drives me.
That's your passion around all of this, and it was interesting before we started coming on air. You were telling when you talk about that transition into college, and you gave the analogy about going to summer camp, and maybe that's a good way to start, because this jump from going from high school into college, it's huge, and I don't think we really realize the toll that it takes and some of the anxiety that it produces in young people. So just, can you share that part of it? Because that just made so much when you said that to me.
Sure. Well, I look at the different life transitions kids have. So certainly when they go to elementary school to middle school and middle school to high school, and the different fears and anxieties parents and kids feel. But it feels like summer camp, overnight summer camp, the time when they're going to be away from home by themselves for at least a week, depending on the camp, and the different emotions that go into that. And when you think about, for those of you parents out there who have experienced that, and think of both sides emotions, you feel, your kids feel, and what goes through your mind, and now magnify that multiple times, and now they're off to college and starting to live an entirely new life. Mm-hmm. And their resources, human beings they depend on, where do they go for their problems? Well, the mom, the dad, their brothers, their friends, they have to find a whole new set of friends and resources and support system to get through the many challenges they face. And I remember that, and there's so much emphasis, are you going to like your roommate? You're going to be away from home. But that is a fractional piece of what kids have to deal with. And the other point I would make, Ann, is I think what's forgotten here is probably the biggest thing that kids have to deal with that gets kind of overlooked is the emotions the parents are feeling and how that reflects in the communication with the kids. Parents are concerned about money, and is this going to be worth the investment, and did I do a good job raising my kids as I send them off to the world? So, and then the anxiety parents feel very much can impact
absolutely
their experience for kids too.
And it's true, isn't it? And you think, and one of the statistics that I found really alarming, and I don't know if we've talked about this the last time you were on too, is just what we're finding now is the number of kids that, as the summer goes on, and they actually prepare to leave, some of them don't go. And I forget the name of it. There's actually phenomenon, and it's increasing that they just can't leave because that anxiety surfaces and bubbles. And I think that's one of the things. When you look at sort of the big issues that you talked about, one, it's sort of navigate, and we'll home in on them individually, but the big issues. Number one is dealing with, it's the relationships with the roommate. That's just one piece of it. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, there's academic pressure. What are the other things that kids have to navigate, the big issues, and then we'll home in on them in kind of when you think about the things that kids have to navigate once they hit college?
Sure. Well, one of them is, I think that you're coming from an environment where you could be a big fish.
Right.
You know, whether it's academically, whether it's popularity-wise. So you leave that environment, and now you're just a regular Joe or Joanne.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of assimilate to being in a different status type, so on and so forth. Which I think from a area of confidence, that can really be a hit to kids, being up here in high school and then all of a sudden having to rebuild that framework.
That is huge. That is huge. And especially when and you see it much more often now, Mark, is so much of self-esteem in kids is built around maybe they're getting all A's, or maybe they're being the sports star in the eyes of their parents.
Yes.
And they don't want to disappoint them when they get to college and they're no longer. Say, what am I now if I'm not the big sports star? What am I now if everybody around me is an academic superstar? So that's one of the areas that you have found a way to kind of talk to kids about. Can you talk a little bit more about that sort of the big fish thing, and how do you help kids cope with that? What do you say to kids who get this anxiety and they're afraid to maybe try out for something new, or they're afraid of losing that status? How do you deal with that, or advice do you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ann, you have to have a template for your own self-esteem and self-confidence. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I work with kids on is, what are the things, regardless of the environment you're in, what are the things that make you feel good about yourself? What are things that you are passionate about that you build your confidence and self-esteem on, regardless of where you are? And so I think the characteristics, the skills, the traits you personally have that people perceive that makes you stand out, I think those are important, because when you go off to college and you are trying to find your place, so to speak, the best way to find your place is to be endearing to other kids. And the number one way in my mind to be endearing to other kids is empathy. Mm-hmm. And having the ability to receive empathy, share empathy. You can't fail there. I mean, if you have the empathy.
But you're so right, because I think what ends up happening is young kids, number one, they're so self-conscious when they go out there and they think that I'm all alone in all the feelings that I'm feeling. But if they could just see the difference it would make if they were able to think about the other person and have empathy, and how that would make people open their arms to them, but there's this shyness and reserve because there's an element of fear involved in that. But that's something you encourage kids to do, is just to sort of reach out and smile and be compassionate toward others, and that whole empathy thing, right?
And I think, Ann, you're spot on. And I think to build on what I'm saying, I think that one thing is everybody's in the same boat, right? So from an empathy and comparison perspective, everybody has the opportunity to share in that difficulty. And I don't just tell kids to be empathetic. I tell them different ways they can be empathetic.
You give specific. Can
Yes.
you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's really important. That's a tool. That's another one. When we talk about resources that we're giving to young people, you're sharing some of those strategies. So can you talk a little bit more about that? And I know this is what you do when you do your seminars and you do your courses and things like that, but if you could share some of that with us.
Well, I think one of the things I talk about is when you're meeting new people, there's this fear. I think adults have it too. It's like, what am I going to say? I don't know what to say.
Right.
And I always tell kids, what the best way to approach that is, everybody likes to hear themselves talk. So if you don't know what you want to say, just keep asking questions to the other person about them. Because the more they get to talk, right?
This is great.
And it's so simple. And guess what? It also buys you time to figure out what you want to say as they keep talking.
And why do we think that kids actually know these things, that we don't really have to teach. We teach them, Shakespeare, but these are the skills that are going to get them through life for the rest of their life. But it's so important that we actually teach them those skills, right?
Yeah, you're right. And what I don't think parents know, and how would they, because there's no roadmap, when your child graduates from high school, and you were to sit there and say to yourself, is my son or daughter ready to handle college? What would my checklist be to say, okay, yeah, I think they're ready. They can do this, they can do this, they can do this. And part of the struggle is that when you're at home with your family, very often your family is constantly solving problems for you. And whether it be conflict resolution, whether it be problem solving, you are reliant on that. And in college, it's you. So the beginning of the checklist is, do your children know how to adequately solve conflicts, know how to adequately solve problems, and with critical thinking skills and so on and so forth? Because your child could be the most extroverted person in the world. They could be super popular, but that doesn't mean they know how to do these core interpersonal skills. And that's what worries me, because most parents evaluate their kids on, oh, they have lots of friends, they're very confident, but it's a whole new ballgame.
But when you talk about it was so fun, not funny, but interesting, because I was talking to some people from the high school, and they were saying one of the issues that they see is kids just don't know how to solve conflicts on they're so used to the parents running intervention, and that parents aren't teaching them, and maybe the parents don't even have the skills to start at a young age to teach them how to deal with this and to help them figure out how to do it on their own and not intervene all the time and run in and rescue too much, because we really do leave them not so resilient when we take away those those opportunities.
Yes, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think part of the challenge is when you're taught problem-solving skills or critical thinking skills in schools, if you're taught it at all, but even if you are, it's taught in a very academic setting, which is not
scripted thing. Like
it's not
in a health
motivating.
Class, no.
So if it is going to be taught, it has to be taught in an engaging, interactive way. So, and
that's how you do it. You set up in the way you do it with the courses that you do is kind of role playing, right? And you give them opportunities to practice the skills. Is that how it works?
We do. And my number one objective, Anne, is when I work with kids, is the environment that I create is what I call anti-school. I try to be the furthest thing. I get rid of desks. I get rid of any kind of thing that would simulate a classroom. And so in my environment, it's all experiential learning. We're doing role plays of the real situations they face, whether it's in college, in school, whatever it might be. Because if you're teaching a child something, you have to teach them the why. Why are you teaching it to them? Because if you're just teaching them the what, unless they know how they can immediately apply it, they don't care.
That's right. And it has to be relevant to them. It has to be meaningful. But you're right, the whole scripted things. It's so funny because in schools there's been this huge emphasis on social emotional learning, but then it's a lot of the script things. And already kids are saying, please, no more social emotional learning. They've had it because it's all this scripted academic focus, and it's not the way that it's going to resonate with kids, right? It isn't if...
No, and you said something earlier I want to follow up on. When you talked about kids who get so anxious that they opt not even to go to college, right. In addition to that problem, kids who drop out after 1 or 2 semesters, the devastation that goes with that, because you've put so much excitement and emotion into that experience, and then when it doesn't work out, there's this, what do I do now?
Right. But isn't that true, though? I think one of the things, and I look at it from my own experience, one of the things, too, growing up is when you're on a college campus and you first get there and you look around and you think that everybody else is secure and confident, it's me. But this is really almost universal, isn't it?
It is.
But kids fake it. But if you look, but they see it's only, and they don't understand this anxiety, and they're frightened by it, and they don't have ways to calm and self-soothe. And you talk a lot about coping strategies and ways that, and you actually, before we came on air, you were talking about the whole concept of mindfulness, and which is so science-based, so research, and as an incredible coping tool that everybody should be using, adults, kids. Can you speak a little bit about what mindfulness is and how it can be a coping strategy and how you employ it, because it's so important?
Well, and a quick anecdote, it's funny, I always get teased by my friends and family because I always have so much energy. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. I don't take any artificial energy drinks. I'm just very passionate, engaged human being. And I bring that up because I have trouble relaxing because I always have so much energy. So John Kabat-Zinn
Oh, yes, know him well.
has a class at UMass, or there's a class taught of mindfulness. And so I went for a one trial class.
Did you?
I did. And so I went through the class, and it was constantly about breathing and calming yourself. Couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it. So I left the class, and I was saying, yeah, you know what, this mindfulness thing, if this is what it is, I don't know. I don't know how much I can buy into that. How many people can really relax themselves? Now, that was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Now, as I really started to study and learn mindfulness, I noticed that that is a very fractional piece of it. I mean, it is calming and calming yourself and redirecting yourself.
Right.
It is very much that. But there are multiple ways you can be mindful. There are multiple ways you can exhibit mindful behavior. And I want to share with you a very quick and funny anecdote. I was with a bunch of high school students the other day, and I said, how many of you are mindful? How many of you practice mindfulness? And none of them raised their hand. And then I asked them if they utilized their phone for reminders, and they virtually all raised their hand. And I said, well, but that's an example of mindfulness. It might not be focusing on something or breathing a certain way, but it's still a way to exhibit mindfulness. And when I think of how many kids, adults, everybody in the world reach a point of frustration, disappointment, distraction, and if you could use a mindfulness technique kind of to get you off your pattern or habit of some kind, it could change so
It's huge.
much.
It's huge.
And I'll tell you something else. We all, almost every human being on the earth, I believe, says at one point in their life or another, they want to change a habit. It could be losing weight, it could be working out, it could be being nicer, it could be anything. And when you stop and think about habit-changing behavior, there is no magic formula to change a habit. People always say, well, I got to be more motivated, I got to be more disciplined. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a piece of that, there's no doubt. But you have to actually be mindful of you first have to have awareness of the habit, which is a mindfulness act. And then once you have the habit, be mindful of how you want to change it and why you want to change it.
That's right.
And I think that if people could get away from the stereotype that it's some religious foreign,
That's right.
it's the furthest from that.
It's because it's always about emotions. When you think about what's upsetting, it's how you think about a situation. So when you're mindful of and you say, okay, what are my thoughts telling me now? Let's get rid of all those thoughts that are, and not let your thoughts control you, but rather be very, very centered. And that comes from that silencing the thoughts and being able to really connect with that whole inner, and then it's really the source of all wisdom. And then you make, when you calm all those ridiculous thoughts that are flooding your mind, and you can calm yourself, then you can make wiser decisions. And the fact that if we can do some of that centering thing, and then when you think of mindfulness too, it's that whole concept of gratitude, right? That the more one, and this is research based, it's not religious, it's scientific evidence that the more you practice gratitude, the more you calm yourself. So when you're feeling sorry for yourself, if you can suddenly savor and think, what are things that I'm grateful for in my life? And if you can stop and reflect on that, it immediately changes your state of mind. So it calms you, and there's so many different techniques like that out there.
There are, and because I'm a big believer in tangible examples, let me give one to our folks watching one so they could maybe even apply this to their kids. So there's this phrase I call adult speak. Adult speak is when you look at your kids and say, you need to do better on the tests next time. You need to not be late for something. Those are statements that parents and teachers say to kids, but it really goes in one ear and out the other because it's just a statement. There's nothing attached to it. An example of mindfulness is, say you have a child that is sitting at your dinner table not eating with their mouth closed, and you say, chew with your mouth closed. That's adult speak. Chew with your mouth closed. There's no consequence attached to it. It's just a statement. The kid's like, okay. And what typically happens when you say to a child, chew with, they'll start chewing with their mouth closed right then and there. But then the next day, you'll probably have to say it to them again. So what mindfulness is all about is instead of saying to the child, just chew with your, stop chewing with your mouth open or chew with your mouth closed, what you do is you say, I'd like you to chew with your mouth closed, and here's why. The reason is because, and whatever your reasons are,
exactly.
But you explain to them, so the child kind of gets it and says, oh, okay, I can see that. And then you come up with some technique or situation, so then in the future, if they are reminding themselves, they're not reminding themselves to chew with their mouth closed, they're reminding themselves why it's
Right.
important. And it's a total different thought process. And that's what mindfulness is. And so for those of you out there who are not comfortable with mindfulness, who don't really, when it's broken down like that, it doesn't seem so crazy, right?
That's right. It is, and kids respond to. I think we sort of underestimate kids, and they really want to know the relevance and why. And the why is huge for kids. And we sometimes think because I say so, which is what.
Right.
When I was growing up, that was the big thing for my parents. But so if you were to sum up and sort of say, if you were to give, because there's so much we've been covering, and we just sort of scratched the surface as we usually do when we have a conversation.
Yep.
It's because
Yes.
it's so big, but. And then I want you just to sort of say if people wanted to contact you, how they might do it.
Sure.
But if you were just to end with sort of advice to parents, if you could sum up, if you were to say, these are a few things you need to remember, what would you say about sort of this transition to college, and what would be important for parents to know?
Sure. What I would do when we're talking about transition to college, I have very simple advice as a starting point for parents. I would sit down and I would think of 3 or 4 situations that that are easy to figure out, that your kids are going to face in college. So let's give a couple as example. So one of them is, so most kids, or a lot of kids, are sharing living space with someone for the first time. They've always had their own room. So here's a question you could ask to your son or daughter. So if you have an argument where your roommate's leaving the bathroom dirty all the time, or your roommate's coming in super late at night and making a lot of noise, how are you going to address that situation? Now, if your child looks at you and is like, geez, I don't know. Okay, well, that's a pretty big red flag, because those are very common situations. A second scenario would be when you go to join organizations at school, an intramural team, a fraternity or a sorority, an organization you want to be a part of that represents your passion and interest. When you have to go talk and interview for those organizations, what are you going to say about yourself to really pump yourself up and be confident? And if kids don't really know not how to sell themselves in, it's just more how to represent themselves.
And to understand their strengths.
Yeah, and to understand
right?
their strengths, exactly.
Yeah.
So that would be a second thing. And the third thing is, it is critical in college to form relationships with your professors, form relationships with mentors, so you start to build that support system. So how do you do that? If you said to your son or daughter, how are you going to build a relationship with a professor? And if the answer is, well, I'll just go see him after class. Well, everybody goes and sees them after class. That's not enough. So those would be some examples, but just start out by having a simple conversation, bring up 3 or 4 situations, and see if they even have a cogent answer how to deal with it. And if they don't, well, then you might want to seek help.
Yeah.
Not therapeutic
Right.
help, but resources and help.
Resources that could help, because
Yeah.
that's really good. If they don't have the answers, there are people out there like you who can help them with
Exactly.
that. So that's an important part of it too. So I guess I want to thank you for coming on
You're welcome.
and sharing. It
Loved
went by
it.
so
Always do.
fast, but it's such a big issue, and for sharing your wisdom. Can you just give the contact information if
Sure.
someone wanted to?
So my name is Mark Altman. The company is MindsetGo, and this summer we have what we call Mindset College Success Workshops. And like Ann alluded to, these are workshops that are going to help cope in these various specific situations and give kids actual templates and tools that they can refer to and use, so when the situations come up, they'll know how to address them. And if you want more information on dates and times, it's on my website, mindsetgo.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Ann.
it. I want to
Appreciate it.
thank everyone for joining us today on It Takes a Village, Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. I'm Ann Bergen. Thank you.